again, children. Welcome to another bright day of Java. Okay, so to those that are familiar, that is Bosco, right? To those who don't remember, who weren't around and was around, that was the program from the 80s, 70s, or whenever it was. Okay, so that's going to be our team tune for now on. It's going to be Java as Bosco, stylish. Okay, so anyway. Now we are going back to good old Java, okay? So as of yesterday, the last thing we did yesterday was resolve, okay? And we explained the difference between resolve and having a get with two paths. Well, first difference is paths.get can only use two strings. Whereas resolve can use paths, can also use strings. Now, where get is just about gluing the two together, resolve is all about creating one path from two paths. Okay, it's about resolving. It's trying to produce one path from these two. Okay, now if they're incompatible, namely if what is sent to the method is an absolute path, that's all that's going to be returned. All right, so if that guy there is an absolute path, that's all that's going to be returned by this guy. Okay, now if this guy is relative and this guy is relative, it's going to add the two of them. It's just going to join them up like a get. If this guy is absolute and this guy is relative, then it's going to join them up. However, if they're both absolute, okay, if they're both absolute, so if that guy's absolute is fine. It's however, if this guy is absolute, all right, all this is going to return, and they're in two different locations. Let's say see my documents, and this one is C program files. All that's going to be returned from that is C program files. All right. So resolve, if what's sent to the resolve method is a absolute path, that's all that's going to be returned. All right, so it is different from get. It's all about trying to resolve these paths into one path. Okay, so it's not about sticking them together like you do with get. Okay, all that happens with those two, it produces cmydocs/animals.dog. Okay, now this guy up here, this is a relative path, this is an absolute path. So path 2 is a relative path. So this guy, path 1, which is that guy. Path 2, which is that guy. All right. Now, path 2 is an absolute path. Path 1 is a relative path. Relative path calling it. Now, what matters is that what this guy is an absolute path. So that is going to return C/my_docs. I'm going to run it just to prove that it does give us that answer. So this is EX7. So I'm going to run that. Yes, thank you. I know that. So there it is. See my docs. It totally ignores that guy. All right. Now, if I use a get, all that happens with the get is the following. I go paths.get, get rid of all this shit. Paths.get, that's capital P, get, and we go this guy, followed by this guy. So all that happens there is just glues them together. Okay, so resolve is different from get. Okay, it's trying to produce one path. It's trying to resolve the two paths. All right. However, if they're both fundamentally disagree with each other, it's just going to take. So the way it disagrees with it is that if this guy is an absolute path, right? If this guy is an absolute path, that's all. The whole lot of this is just going to return see my docs. Okay. Now, next method we're going to use. I just have the other screen here. Big enough? No, there we are. No, that's big enough. Now, the next one is something called normalize static. 8. Okay. Now, so this is something called normalize. Okay. Now, so we are going now again. These folders don't exist, but we're not asking whether they exist or not. Okay, we're just trying to see how do we get from one folder to another. All right. So we are going to create a path. 1 is equal to paths.get, and this is going to be C. Now you can create this on your own machine if you want. I didn't bother. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to create a second path. Path 2 is equal to path.get, and this is going to be C/user/home. Okay, now I am going to go, so I want to know how do I get from one location to another. So to find how we get from C data to C user home, or the other way around, what we use is relativize. Okay, so I'm going to create a path. I'm going to call it relative path, and this is going to be equal to path 1.relativize path 2. Okay, so the question has to be asked, how do I go from path 1 to path 2? Okay, so we just have to go up one level. Okay, one level. Yeah, that should be one level. We'll just run it and see what we get. Okay, relative path. Now if I run that, oops, go to here, turn off this one, and we get EX8. Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I want. Right, so we were trying to get from path 1, which is this guy, and we want to go to this guy. So how do we get from path 1 to path 2? Well, the first thing we need to do is to go up one level, which is that guy there. And then we just have our two folders, user and home. Okay, so fine, you know, nothing too difficult there. Now, so let's just say I want to resolve. So let's say if I go here now. So what does this, just take this out. So this returns this guy here, which means to get from C/data, we have to go up one level to that guy, and then we go down to user and home. Okay, so you have to be able to read these guys. All right, you have to be able to read these guys. Now, what normalize does, so if you have these guys, it can in your path, it can look confusing. Okay, so what normalize actually does is normalize gets rid of this. All right, now I'll show you what I mean. Now I am going to try and produce, so path1 and dot resolve, and I'm going to go relative path. Now, so path1 dot resolve relative path. Okay. Now, by the way, this is something I noticed. If you're putting stuff in comments, all right, certain keystrokes, certain characters can't be put in comments. Doesn't matter what way you put them in. Could be that type of comment, could be that type of comment. Okay, it could even be a single line comment. You can't actually put that in there. All right, you have to put in that. I'm not too sure why it does that, but I didn't realize. So it's aware of code inside comments. All right, so Java is aware of code inside comments, which is something I did not know. All right, as you can see there, it won't compile, and it says in here, invalid Unicode. Okay, so only certain characters are allowed to be used inside comments. Okay, did not know that. Okay, now, so what does this produce? So path1 is this guy. All right, so I'll show what this produces. It produces this. All right, now, so that is an absolute path. Okay. And this is a absolute path. Okay. Now, relativize always returns a relative path. Okay. So if we go path1, which is an absolute path, resolve relative path, all that happens there is it's going to stick that onto the end of that. Okay. So what does this produce? This produces this. Now, this is going to be an exam question as well. You are going to be able to read that. Now, what that actually means, so this produces, now again, you have to put in comments. Now, in the code that's produced, there is no spaces, okay? But there is spaces. I have to put spaces in here or my code won't compile, okay? You can only have certain characters in comments even. Doesn't matter what type of comment it is, it's still not going to be accepted, all right? Now, so C data user home. Now, what is this? So this produces, so as the relative path dot / user or / home is simply added to the path C data. Simply added to the absolute path C dot data. Now, so this guy here, as long as it's not an absolute path, you know what happens. So it produces that. Now, that is difficult to read. Okay, that is difficult to read. Now, at this point, I am going to, at this moment in time, I am going to create a file, a folder called user and a folder called home. Okay, so I'm going to go to my hard drive here. I go to my C drive. And I'm going to create a folder called user, okay, which I have created here. Oh, bully for me. So I've created a folder called user, and I've created a folder called home. Okay, and I have created a folder called data. So you create, so I put in here, at this point, we create a folder C data and folders C user home. Okay. Right. So, and again, I need to do this. Let me just see, can I put in this guy? Does it accept this? Right. Yes, it does. Cool. So C user home and C data. Okay. Just right click and create the folder. Okay. Great. So now I want to check, does this actually exist? Okay. I want to check, does this folder exist? So this is the folder. So I'm going to print off. Does this path exist? So we go path1.resolve relative path. Run it. Oops. We've got files that exists. I want this. See this if it exists. It's in here. It's a file that exists. Path1 resolve dot relative path. It says true. Okay. So even though it produces this slightly wonky looking address, it does exist. Now, this is actually that is awful. Okay, so this guy, C data user home is actually this folder. C user home. All right. Now, what normalize does, so this is a dot, this is a dot. Now, Java can read that no problem. Okay. Anything you do with files or folders in Java, it can recognize that the exact same as it recognizes that. Okay, it's just a different format. However, you can have more than one sets of dots. You can put in dots down here as well, and it can get very, very unwieldy very, very quickly. Okay, so machine has no problem reading that. To the machine, that is exactly the same as that. However, we find that easier to read because we can see it's the home directory inside the user directory. Okay, it's the home folder which is inside the user folder. Whereas this guy here, this is one level up from data. You go to C, so then it becomes C user home. Now, what normalize does is it gets rid of all the needless characters. So it can convert that to that. Let me just show you. Okay. So we are going to take that out. Okay. So this returns true as C is this guy is the same as a C user home. Okay, it's the same as C user home, and this folder does exist. Okay, so this guy produces that. Okay, so this guy produces that. All right, produces that. Now, which is an absolute path. All right, that is an absolute path. You go up one level, okay, to the C drive. Then you go down, user home. Now you have to be able to read that for the exam. However, when you're programming, when you're doing your normal programming, you want to make life easy for yourself. So what normalize does, it just removes all of the needless characters, okay? So normalize will remove those. Okay, let me just show you an operation. So what do we use normalize for? We use normalize to tidy up the output. So this guy becomes C user home. All right. So I'm gonna go here. We go. So normalized. I'm going to say normalized address is. Just go here. So I'm going to go files. Oops. I'm going to go path1 dot resolve relative path dot dot normalize. Okay, so that is going to produce, there it is, C user home, and that is a full path. All right, you can assign that to a new path. We go path, new path is equal to path dot get. No, that's not going to work. No, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. No. Okay, just never mind that. So we can, I'll try this path is equal to path. So I put in all of this. I'm going to got toString. That should give us the path. Yeah. Okay. Path1 resolve relative path dot normalize. So that produces that guy up here. Then we normalize it, which produces C user home, and then we convert it to a string, toString, because paths.get only. So that is going to assign C user home to new path. Okay. So this creates a path, this guy, which we then normalize to become that. which we then call the toString method which converts this to the string that guy, which is used in a get to be assigned to the path, new path. Okay, so let's normalize. Normalize is the handy little method. It gets rid of all of this shit here, because let's be honest, those are confusing. All right, it's much easier to read that than it is to read that. But for the exam, you're gonna have to know that. All right, if you know how to do them, it's going to be a handy enough question. All right, but you would normally use normalize to make things easier to read. Okay, but Java can read that just as easy as it can read that. Okay, let's change this around. So there we are. I got my head on the button now. Now, so now we're nearly finished this particular section, but there's another subsection of this coming up as well. So this one here is static void ex. Okay. Now, so to real path. This is called to real path. Now, so let's go back to here. Now, what the real path returns? So this returns a absolute path which points to the location of your file or directory. Okay, so as you're doing something with files, it has to be in a try catch block. So we're going to say catch IO exception. We know there's going to be, we're dealing with files, so we can have an IO exception there. So SYI. Oops. Right. Now, when you have a checked exception like this, catch IO exception, that means there has to be code in here that could generate an IO exception. Okay. If you want to get rid of that, you can put in exception. All right. But I know an IO exception could be generated in here. All right. Now, if you have a named check exception, file not found exception, IO exception, I can't think of any other ones at this moment in time. Okay, if you have a named checked exception in here, that means a particular checked exception. You have to have code in here that could generate that named checked exception. The only ones I can think of offhand is file not found exception and IO exception. Okay, now, so we are going to, first of all, so we know that this file txt exists. Okay, so I'm going to print out here. So I'm going to go paths.get. I'm going to put in a, now this is going to be a relative path. Okay, relative path, and it's going to be text.txt. This is going to be to real path. Okay, take all options. Now, what that returns is, I'll just print it off. Main examples.ex9. Ooh, bollocks. Okay. Now, so to real path. Now, this is different to absolute path. Okay. Now, let me just show the difference between to real path and to absolute path. All right. Let's say I go in paths dot get. Now, a file that doesn't exist is animals. Okay. And then if I go to absolute path. Now, to absolute path will print out the path if the file exists or not. Okay. So to real path. So to real path only works with actual files that exist. Okay. Now, if this file did not exist, we would get a, this one is no such file exception. Okay. If this file did not exist, we would get a no such file exception. Okay. Whereas to absolute path, it with to absolute path, it does not matter. File exists or not. The file does not exist. This file does not exist, and yet it will print out the actual, it will print out the address whether this file exists or not. Print out the full address. Okay. Now, so I'll just comment out this guy for a minute. Leave a minute. Okay. If I put in another file that doesn't exist to real path, okay, I'm going to go paths.get. This file is going to be called muck.txt, and this is going to be to real path. In that link option sheet. Okay. We get a no such file exception. Muck.txt is caught. Okay. This will generate a no such file exception, as this file does not exist. So the difference between to real path is to real path actually accesses your file. Okay. To absolute path does not access a file, but to real path actually accesses your files. So it has to exist. So it has to exist to work. If the file does not exist, to real path will return, what's it called again? No such file exception. Okay. So I'm going to comment out that guy. So that means, what do you usually do? Now, by the way, the path can apply to folders. So to real path and to absolute path. So to real path applies to paths. So the endpoint can be a folder or a file. Okay, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether the endpoint is a folder or a file. works just peachy. So what you usually do when you're using to real path, because you don't want to be getting no such file exception. So quite simply we do this. So I'm going to create path. Path1 is equal to paths.get src Android. And I'm going to say if files.exists file.exists path1 path1.toRealPath. Okay, so if this exists, okay, if it exists, what's it gonna do? There it is. So we usually use an if statement or a ternary operator. Or a ternary operator. Use an if statement or a ternary operator to check if the file path actually exists before we use to real path. You don't need any such check for to absolute path. Now, I'll stop that video because that is, there's a 9.2b, which is a kind of a separate section, okay? So this video should be up by this evening, and the following video should be up by tonight, right? So I will stop this video. So I will stop everything. So where am I? So that's that section finished. Now the next section is going to be 9.2b. All right. So I'll stop that recording.